It's not a science talk. I'm intending to trigger a discussion, and it's about a topic that concerns me, and that's the immediacy of the climate crisis. As I said, I'm not going to answer the question. I'm going to ask it. I'm going to begin with from a place I feel safe, and that's geology, which is the study of rocks. I'm going to give a geological perspective on immediacy. It's just going to take me a couple of minutes. And I'm going to talk a little bit about where I came from to working on climate. And then I'm going to give an illustration of immediacy. I have been given permission by Toya to use a video briefly. I have a reason for doing so. It will not be a PowerPoint presentation, I promise. So, a geological perspective on immediacy. The entire climate crisis boils down to one thing, and that's carbon dioxide. And carbon dioxide comes into the atmosphere from only one place, and that's volcanoes. And it goes out of the atmosphere on the only relevant process that removes it from the atmosphere, and I will say permanently, although if I was being a true geologist, I would say for 400 million years. The only way it leaves the atmosphere is through the slow dissolving of rocks. And when you look at a rock, you probably think it doesn't even dissolve. And that's because it's so slow. You can't see it. You're never going to see it, but it happens. Now, we're living in a planet which is so used to climate change. Normally, temperature varies lots. In fact, in more extreme times, temperature might even change by 1 degree in maybe a few tens of millions of years. It might do, by a degree or so in a million years. In super extreme times, like we live in today we live in an ice age. Temperature changes are actually naturally extremely fast. We can get a 1 degree change in just a few thousand years because of natural processes, just because of how the Earth is leaning and its relationship to the sun and its orbital path. So we're living in an extreme time of Earth history. But that's nothing compared to the very short window that we're in right now. Because now temperature is changing by a degree in just decades, just a couple of decades. This has not happened. That's 1 degree in a couple of decades. This has not happened since the dinosaurs went extinct. Now, that might not mean much to you. You might not know when the dinosaurs went extinct. It was 65 million years ago. Earth was hit by a meteorite. It wasn't a very good day. So what does 65 million years mean? Well, it's impossible for us to grasp. I actually think the only people who can really grasp geological time are children under the age of 9, and that's because they still live in the age of fantasy. I think when I tell a child about a million years, they actually know what I mean. I don't know what I mean. So I'll do what everyone does. I'll do a pedagogic analogy. I'm going to use length to represent time. Imagine a centimeter. It's about the width of your finger. 1 centimeter. That's a decade. That's how long it takes for us to change the climate by a degree. Well, to get back to the dinosaurs, it's the distance from Stockholm to Linköping, almost exactly. That's the scale we're talking about. That's the scale of the challenge. 1 degree in decades. It is so fast. Perhaps, sometimes I think you need to be a geologist to really understand how fast it is. But hopefully I'm wrong, because we're not very many geologists. So I'm going to tell you, that's my background about immediacy from a geological perspective. It's very difficult for us to grasp. So I'm into what we really mean. So I'm going to reflect back on my own research history, my own research, and think about the question of immediacy. The first thing, you've known me for 2 years, and you've known me as a researcher working on climate. Well, I did not start as researching on climate. I'm 52 years old. I started researching when I was 21. That gives me 31 years. Most of that time is not spent researching on climate. I did my PhD studying the reactions between minerals in rocks. Now, these are the reactions that ultimately control how much CO2 comes out of volcanoes and how much CO2 goes back into the rocks. They're slow. They're really slow. They're millions of years slow reactions. If you dissolve salt in a glass of sugar in a cup of tea, it dissolves while you wait. If you try and dissolve a mineral, you wait for millions of years to slowly emit CO2 to the atmosphere through a volcano. That's what I studied. That gave me my geological perspective on time. Since then, since I worked on minerals and how they break down, much of my research and what I'm known for in the scientific community is research on earthquakes, on volcanoes, and on tsunamis. Now, it's very easy to see the immediacy of earthquakes. In one morning in Haiti, the year 2010, over 300,000 people died in less than a minute. There's an immediacy that's hard to get away from when you're thinking about earthquakes. My research was about the forecasting of earthquakes. I looked at those very slow reactions in rocks, and I looked at other reactions in rocks near the surface that were faster to try and see if they would leak chemicals into water and that would allow us to forecast earthquakes. The way I did that's irrelevant for this talk, so I'm not going to go into it. On the 16th of September 2002, a magnitude 5.6 earthquake happened north of Iceland. I put forward a method where that earthquake could have been forecast. And that's what I'm known for in the academic world. At that time, there was another science going on in the background for me, and that was the science of climate. There was this figure, and this figure showed a hockey stick. And it showed how the temperature was fairly stable, and then it kind of shot up in recent years. I found it fascinating. How could we actually change a geological system? I found it really interesting. I found it so interesting that when the position for director of the Blaine Centre came up, I actually put my name forward, despite the fact that I knew nothing about climate. I thought I'd do it anyway. I thought that somehow but I did it out of fascination. I thought this was one of the most fascinating questions. I didn't do it out of fear of climate change. The former director of the Blaine Centre is a person I admire immensely. He told me that climate change was so slow that society would adapt, and it was much more important to do research on earthquakes because of their immediate danger that they put forward for us. Over time, I've learned that the reverse is actually true. So was the former director of the Blaine Centre. We would completely agree with one another. The climate crisis is all around us. It's not like an earthquake that happens suddenly, that catches us and then it's all there at once. But it's creeping up from behind us. If you turn around, it's there. It's lurking in the background. At the point of realization of the climate crisis, we'll already be in the middle of it. I want you to reflect back to February 2020. It's 1 year, just over a year ago. There was a day that the Swedish health authority, Folkhälsomyndigheten, upgraded the risk status for the new coronavirus from low to very high. Happened in a day. The coronavirus crisis crept up behind us. It wasn't there and it was there. It was so fast. The climate crisis will do the same thing. It is doing the same thing. By the time we realize it will be all around us. And when I say we, I mean all of us. This is a so-called preaching in a church. I'm talking to a group of people who understand that the climate crisis is all around us. but society doesn't. Now, I now want to reflect back. I'm going to carry on for another 7 minutes. Toya's going to let me. I'm going to reflect back again to my earlier research, which was on earthquakes and on volcanoes and on tsunamis. I'm going to reflect back to a day we all remember where we were. There are a few of those days in our history that we remember where we were. For a British person, you know exactly where you were when Margaret Thatcher stepped down. You know exactly where you were when the airplanes hit the Twin Towers. You also know exactly where you were on the 26th of December 2004. When the news started coming in, and it came in a different way than normal. Normally when something happens, we hear all about it, but we didn't. We heard about it stage by stage. There'd been an earthquake in the Indian Ocean. There'd been a tsunami. It affected maybe a few thousand people. Maybe it was 10,000. Maybe it was 100,000. It was not until January that we had any idea what was really going on. It was such a catastrophe that the news couldn't even get out of the affected region. Now I'm going to show you a video clip. This video clip is taken by a German tourist. I want you to think about immediacy when you watch this video clip. When it starts, I will turn the sound off as quickly as I can because the sound can be disturbing. I want you to think about immediacy. The German tourist who is making this video is holding his baby in his arms on one hand and filming with a video camera in the other. The film was made at a few minutes before 10 local time in the beach resort Khao Lak in Thailand. The film continues for 11 minutes, and because the German tourist forgot to turn his camera off, he ran with his child to high ground and survived. At the point in the video where it ended, 45 seconds later, you hear the crash where the wave hits the shore. I want to end by talking about the person who was standing beside him. And this was one of the bravest people I've ever met. This is a man from Sweden, and he stood there too. He's a strong man, but he didn't run as quickly. He held onto a tree. He was with his family, his 2 daughters and his wife. He held onto a tree, and he was so strong that the wave passed him and he was able to hold on. But then it moved out and he couldn't hold on any longer, and it pulled him out into the water. He spent 1.5 hours in the water. He knows it was 1.5 hours because he saw his clock on it. He remarked on his watch how it carried on working for the full 1.5 hours he'd been in the water when he was finally swept up on the shore. Spent 1.5 hours dodging obstacles that were moving around in the sea, which was moving in all directions. For the full 1.5 hours, he experienced the entire thing in black and white. I guess he didn't need colour to survive. He never thought once of his family. It wasn't time. The immediacy was about staying alive. He came home with one of his daughters and his wife. His older daughter would have been 26 today. She would be, and no doubt, a young climate activist fighting against another natural disaster, or another disaster, a non-natural disaster, a disaster that we're creating. There's an immediacy in a father losing his daughter on a beach in Thailand as the wave rolls in. But the wave is rolling in. The wave is rolling in, and it's a much bigger wave. And we're all looking forward to a future where we can lose our children in a tsunami wave, a different type of wave, the wave of climate change. How can we feel and express that immediacy so that the climate crisis is viewed as the crisis that it actually is? Thank you.
Yes. Thank you very much, Alasdair. It's just a moment to let this sink in, I think. So it's open for questions and reflections and ideas and what have you. Thank you so much, Alison.
Can I suggest we do as Monica often advises us, is that one goes around and people can express their feeling about the immediacy of the climate crisis and more about how to convey it. How do we actually make it happen? So that anyone who feels like starting starts and then passes that onward.
I will start because I always feel like I want to talk. No, it's just, I think I told you this earlier today, Alasdair. It's when you really hear the truth from a researcher, it's so, in a strange way, liberating, because we all know it's there. We all know it's dangerous, but it's the lid on that is so frustrating. We need exactly this. Thank you so much.
Well, I can follow. First, I started listening to Alasdair with one ear, trying to do other stuff at the same time. But then suddenly I just stopped doing all other things because this story took me by heart. And like Toya says, it's so bloody strong. And I would like everyone to listen to this story. You cannot grasp the urgency of what's happening to the planet. And how shall we understand? We're just humans trying to live our lives. And this story tells it all, period. So thanks a lot, Alasdair.
I have, I mean, I'm not repeating everything that has been said, but thanks. I think that emotions are a key in communication because we are all humans, and I think you showed that really well today. I mean, as a scientist, I can be concerned by numbers, but what actually hit me is my immediate surroundings. How am I affected? How is my child affected? How are my closest persons affected?
Sherwin.
Jo, men det var en väldigt starkt budskap. Väldigt bra framställt. Så jag undrar om du har provat det här tidigare och vilka reaktioner du fått. Men även metaforiskt funkar det så bra det här för att folk var väldigt lugna vid stranden och tittade på det här utan att förstå vad som är på gång. Så den parallellen är väldigt viktig och intressant. Att det kommer att slå mot oss på ett sätt som vi inte kan fatta nu. Och det kommer vara en överraskning och vår förmåga att ta hand om det här kommer också vara väldigt bristfälligt när det väl händer. Eller ja, det händer som du sa på många håll, men när det drabbar oss personligen. Men frågan till dig var, är det något nytt det här, eller har du använt det här tidigare, och vilka reaktioner har du fått tidigare?
I have not used this ever before. Toya teaches us. She pushes us and teaches us to try and reach out and communicate in different ways. So I've never done this before. I've lectured on the tsunami before in a very different context, but I've never drawn this parallel.
Mm. Superbra gjort.